This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:07 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. And welcome to Ask a Rabbi.
Good morning, and this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Ask a Rabbi. I am the rabbi of Congregation Eitz Chayim in Port St. Lucie on 540 Northwest University Boulevard, and Suite 102, as it said at the sign-on. And don't you just love that music? That always gets me charged up. That is our melody for Micha Mocha, which is comes from the Song of the Sea when we crossed over the sea and made it to the other side.
It's cool,
yeah. And it's who is like you, God? What a great question. Who is like God? What an interesting concept.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Nobody like God.
There is no, and that's exactly what it's. Who is like you, God? You know, amazing entity, doing wonders, etc. And so, what is God? What is God? I'll change it from who is God to what is God.
Oh boy, here we go.
Here we go. Yeah, nothing like getting it started on a serious question. Curveball, absolutely. So Judaism doesn't say what God is, interestingly. Mostly it says what God isn't. So God isn't something that has form. God is something that doesn't have a beginning or an end, always was. And in a lot of ways, it stops short of being very prescriptive as to what God is or isn't, allowing people to figure out, find out, learn that answer. The Jewish practice is called Na'aseh v'nishma. I'll do the practice, and as I'm doing it, I'll start to gain understanding. So Judaism is interesting because it's what's called a seeker religion. It's not that it has the answers, but it's got lots of great questions. And right.
Wow, okay.
Right. So God is something to be experienced, something to seek. And what does that mean? What does it mean to seek the source of life? Right? Because that's one of the things God is. God is the source of life. God is the source of blessing. And actually the prophet even said God creates evil. Right? God makes good, God makes evil. We even have that. It's kind of interesting. There's a quote that God forms the light and creates darkness. Right? We always think of God as creating light, but what the prophet says is not that God created light, but that God creates darkness so that we can perceive the light. Right? Because it's in the perception that that we are able to understand some of that. And so, right, so the idea is that God has shaped the light, and with that calls it light. Right? Let this be light because it's created by the dark space. It's kind of like an artist. An artist, the painting is not as much created by the color and the shape as it is by the white space, by the container around it. And that actually is not even all that different, surprise, surprise, from Taoism. Taoism points out that it is the hole in a wheel at the spoke, at the hub. Because if you don't have nothingness, you can't make the wheel useful. The wheel is useful because you can put a spoke through the hole. Even though you run supports out to the outside of the wheel, it's the hole in the middle that makes it work.
So there's no, if you want to say hierarchy, if you will, a la the Catholics with the Pope, in Judaism.
Correct.
Because the whole concept is totally different.
It is very different. It's like I said, it's a seeker's religion. And an allegory is often used to explain it, that we're taking a walk in the woods. I don't know where the exit is to the woods, but I know where I've been, and I know where some of the mistakes are. So let's walk together.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Let's walk together And between what you've experienced and what I've experienced, maybe together we'll find the way through the forest.
So in a way, are you closer to, I want to say Buddhism maybe? Or Hindu? Well, but they have their idols.
Well, but those are no worse than the icons.
Yeah, I guess.
All right.
Yeah,
they're not idols; they're focal devices.
Okay.
And I think that's a tragic set of terminology that's crept into the world. That's an outsider looking in, right? The outsider watches the Catholic bow in front of the statue and thinks that they're worshiping the statue. The Catholic knows they're not. They're looking at the statue because it's easier to look at something, to visualize it for a lot of people, than it is to, go and hug an amorphous God, right? Hug the air. It's hard, right? And the Hindus and the Buddhists are the same. They have things to help them focus. Buddhism, we got to be really a little bit careful because Buddhism is such a wide. I mean, it's even more diverse than Christianity's, and Christianities are pretty diverse. But when you get into the back parts of China and different parts of Asia, it morphs, and it morphs again when it goes to Japan, because all these religions blend with the local indigenous religion. Can't help it. Yeah. And to give people a feel for that, I like to ask my Sunday school students, what would Judaism be like if we had started on Key West? Right? How would the religion be different? It'd be fundamentally different. First of all, we wouldn't have mountain goats, right? Right. So, the mountains are a little bit shallow in Key West.
And there'd be drinks with little umbrellas.
Yeah. Well, that's now, but those are also recent inventions, little umbrellas and drinks. And actually, the chickens are fairly new too, right? Because those were introduced.
True. Yeah.
By people who came to live there, and so right. So that's part of the question you have to ask. Right? If Judaism is a world religion, and since we're all over the world, it's a world religion, then theoretically it could have started anywhere. I mean, it happens to have started in the Middle East, and so big parts of it are Middle Eastern. But as it morphs, as it goes to different places, for example, as Jews settled in Europe, foods changed because what was available changed, religious practices changed, and even the way Hebrew was pronounced changed.
Okay, so you're a seeker religion.
Right.
American Indian tribes
are seekers. Right. There's a lot of seekers. The Sikhs are seekers. That's another seeker religion.
True. I didn't even think of the Sikhs.
Yeah. Right. And so there's a lot of, in fact, if you pare down through a lot of religions, a lot of them really are seeker religions. And, and I actually think, based on some work that some of my bar and bat mitzvah students have done, my b'nai mitzvah, that not only is it now, but when Joseph was talking to his brothers, and he says to them, I am one who fears God, I don't think that would have made any sense in the context. But if he had said to them, I'm one who seeks God, then they could have related to that. And that would have, fearing God isn't necessarily going to put somebody at ease. Right? Fear seldom puts people at ease. And so, when you're God-fearing...
But a lot of Christian religions...
like to say that.
Well, yeah.
Well, I think that's a mistranslation. The root for the Hebrew word for fear is related to the verb for perception. And so like I said, I became kind of convinced as I was working with this student through the translation, and it is connected to that scene with Joseph and his brothers in Egypt. It makes much more sense for him to say, I'm a God seeker. And you can be comfortable because since I'm seeking, then I'm working at making myself as good a person as I can be. Because if I'm seeking this source, I'm not going to do it by ripping people off. Right, but if I fear God, that might mean it has to do with how people react to punishment. Okay, so let's flip into the psychology side of what she does. And when you overly punish somebody, then the behavior is no longer associated with what's right and what's wrong, but with what avoids punishment. Right? So the crime is not robbing the bank, the crime is getting caught. Right? And for a lot of
I used to get caught all the time.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Just look at my knuckles. Yeah. Oh.
Well, but I mean, that's right. So that's the problem with parents who over discipline, is they tend to have kids who will lie, cheat, and steal, because their object is not to become a good person, but to avoid the punishment.
Ooh.
Yeah. Right. And it's one of the subtle things. Punishment does not work anywhere near as well as rewards do. And that's hard. I know that's very hard for parents to get. And, I mostly got it. You can train a dog so much faster with rewards than you can with punishment. If you punish the dog, you will have a fearful, you have a dog who has a risk of being violent. They might bite, much more likely to bite if they get disciplined harshly.
Yeah.
And so, if it works for dogs, why do we think that kids are so different? And I realize that might fly in the face of, kids are humans. We're still animals, and we still respond to reward and punishment along much the same ways. And I once got in trouble at Goodyear for telling people who were turfing and strutting that that's what they were doing.
Yes.
Yeah, I've gotten a little more tactful in my old age. It didn't quite call it turfing and strutting, although that's what they were doing. And we certainly see that behavior in corporate America and all over America.
Yeah, that you do. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really not that different from, well, as I put it at the meeting at Goodyear, it's not all that different from what I see in the backyard from the boys when the girls are in heat. Right? Yeah. And strutting is an interesting phenomenon. Dogs do it all the time. And back when I used to show dogs, which I used to do for many years, and terriers are frequently, they spar. They teach them to spar in the ring. So they put on these great big, I'm tough guy kind of airs. And I remember one funny time at a dog show. I was sitting there talking with somebody, and I had my little toy poodle, little 7-pound toy poodle, and 7-8 pounds. He's 10 inches at the shoulder, and I feel this strange tug on the lead, and I look down at my dog because I'd not been paying proper attention to him. I'd been talking to somebody, and I look down, and he's sparring with an Airedale. And I'm like, dude.
Bad choice.
You could be a chew toy for that Airedale.
I was going to say, that's one bite.
Right. The good news for my dog was that the Airedale was amused by this performance.
Your iPad's almost as tall as that dog.
Yeah, my iPad is almost as tall as the dog. We actually have something called a wicket that's put down on top of toy poodles to make sure that they're not too large.
Oh, man. Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, all kinds of things. The dog show world is an interesting world. Times I miss it. I've dabbled with the idea of, doing a teeny bit of it. Certainly not the way that I used to do it, which is that we used to go out to dog shows almost every weekend.
Dear friend of ours has produced a pet show for years. His name is John Patch, and he was on Business Talk Network for a long time now. He's on Talk Media Network. And, of course, he would always go and do shows in New York at the big show in Madison Square. And, boy, did he have stories.
Yeah.
It was absolutely amazing.
When I stopped showing, the year that we stopped, which was when I was going back to rabbinical school, we stopped. I think it was the year right before it. And that year, one of my dogs had an invitation to the garden.
Ooh.
Yeah, he was
So
he was the number 7 dog in his breed.
Wow.
When we stopped, and we stopped in September, so I don't know where he would have ended up had we finished out the year.
So did you show what, mostly in the Midwest?
Yeah, well, the Eastern Seaboard.
Oh, okay.
We would. I used to come to Florida for the winter circuit. The shows.
So there is a circuit.
There definitely is a Florida winter circuit in January, and it cuts up through mostly the northern part. It doesn't really come down to. There probably are some parts of it that come all the way south, but we didn't do that part. We used to go up by DeLand and Lakeland and Tampa, and that area.
So how many dogs would show?
Oh, at a dog show?
Yeah.
You can get 4,000 dogs at a dog show.
Holy smokes.
You can get a huge number of dogs. Yeah. They become really, really big, especially the multi-day shows. People camp, and they'll camp for 4 or 5 days at a time at a site, and every day is a different show. So a different, like a group of kennel clubs. This started during one of the fuel crises. They started bringing dog shows together when my mother would show, back when I was little. Then dog shows would be 1 or 2 days at different places, and that was all you ever had. But with the fuel concern, dog shows started to get together, and in order to have a better environment, they would jointly rent space, and then one club would have a show on Friday, one would have it on Saturday, one would have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you'd have this string of shows.
County fair where you move from town to town.
Something not unlike that. And so we lived in a motorhome with the dogs. It was really quite interesting.
So how many dogs did you show?
Well, let's see. I used to show poodles and crested, so probably around 4 at a time. A boy and a girl in each breed.
And they were all living with you in the motorhome?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. There's lots of room in a large motorhome. You'd be surprised. They're not big dogs either. We used to joke they fold well. Right. They're small. So the Chinese cresteds are somewhere between a toy and a miniature poodle.
So you could always get high-quality food
You took it with you. You took it with you.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And you definitely bottled water, because dogs are funny. They don't like to drink strange water. They don't like to drink somebody else's tap water because it smells of different chemicals.
Really?
Yeah. So you're much better off either using bottled water, right? Because that's more consistent in taste, and you can get them used to that pretty easily. Or you take water from home. And I actually had one dog that we traveled with. We used to call her our booth dog because she just traveled with us. We took all our dogs with us. And we used to take bathroom water, not even just water, but bathroom water, a bottle of bathroom water for her, because she had to have a little cup of bathroom water at night to go to bed. I don't spoil my dogs.
Holy smokes.
So, but in a motorhome, you can do that. You can, and you don't have to unload stuff and get into a hotel room.
Sure.
And then get back out. That was, it took less than 1 year for us to figure out that we wanted to motorhome it. And that was wonderful, because you'd roll into the dog show, and in a half hour you'd be set up. You put out a little portable fencing area where you can take the dogs out to be exercised, and you set out a couple of chairs, a couple tables, and you're done. Right? And nowadays, these little motorhomes become 3 times their size.
Sure, yeah.
They were just, I'm going to date myself, they were just coming out with some of the extensions when we stopped showing. So we have our
You're
motorhome.
in the Winnebago days?
Yeah. We have actually a Winnebago, and it has an extension on it. The living room just goes, and I remember when we were looking at that and buying it, it was like, oh man, look at that! Look how big that living room gets. Yeah, you can actually run around, and the dogs can frolic, which they did. Now they traveled in crates because that's much safer. Right, and the crates are bungeed into the motorhome because it just wasn't worth the risk of anybody being injured.
It's like belting your dog in.
Yeah.
You bet. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just wise to be safe. It's the shoulda, woulda, couldas are best when they don't have to be exercised. And, that's a significant thought. So that was my crazy days of dog showing. Yeah.
How did we get into
We got into dog showing because we were talking about turfing and behavior.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah, we talked about reward and punishment. And I always do think of because I don't have two-legged children. I was not able to carry a child to term. So, so I don't have a two-legged child. But I have a whole bunch of four-legged ones. And
sometimes,
well, it's socially acceptable to throw a dog in a crate.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes.
Right. For babies, we call those cribs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but the idea is that it contains the animal at a time when you need to have hands free.
Sure.
And so getting back to what I said, I find when I work with kids, and I do a lot of teaching of all different ages, that rewards work a whole lot better than getting angry or punishing or any of the negative stuff. And, I've got a couple of students that I work with that people have said nobody can work with this kid. They're just non-responsive. They're this, they're that. And, and I read the previous teacher's notes, and it's like, and it's not that I'm anything great, but I'm willing to give a kid space and time, and I'm willing to work through some of those things. And so I'm thinking of 2 or 3 students right now that are now performing very well, and they're doing the work, and they're not fighting the lesson, right? And there was this one who the notes that was kid says, "I don't know," all the time. The kid knew perfectly well, just was bored silly. And, so for that student, you have to take the curriculum, stay within it, but you need to challenge within it. And there's lots of different ways to do that. Anything that encourages a child to think, I think, is worthwhile.
So now you also deal with the Chinese youngsters.
Right. That's what I'm thinking of at the moment.
Do you have, you don't have the same problems.
Oh, they've got all the same stuff we've got.
They do.
Yeah, they do. They've got kids who have attention challenges. They have kids that are, don't want to take the lessons. That mommy and daddy want them to take the lessons, but they really don't care. You've got kids that are, there's a couple of other little challenges that come in. If the kids' English skills are not great, it's really hard to have not adult content, but older kid content in the lessons for the basic levels, right? But at the basic levels, they don't want, this is my mom, this is my dad, this is my family. That gets old and how many times can you say the 7 days of the week or the 12 months of the year? And yet they've got to learn these things. And so when you're dealing with an older child and you're going through that content, you have to frame it for them. Like, what days do you go to school? Do you take piano lessons? What days do you take piano lessons? Is it important to know the days of the week? All right. So you try to, work it that way. And so it's not just a rote thing. And it's an interesting, the online teaching of English for the Chinese students is a very interesting experiment. It's a wonderful woman in China who struggled with learning English herself and teaching her children English. She wanted to offer to kids the ability to learn to speak English in a more natural way so as to be understood.
Conversational.
Right, conversational. Yeah. And that's the big goal. And so that's why it's helpful to go beyond the curriculum, especially if the child is older, and to start to anchor it into their life. Because we learn from context, always, no matter what we're learning. We know that kids learn a second language better when somebody in their environment speaks that language. Right? They don't learn it so well when they go to school and they have it, Mondays and Tuesdays, and that's it. They learn maybe enough vocabulary to get through the test.
Well, I remember Carol talking about at the Indiana University Lab School. Mm-hmm. And so by the 4th grade, they were speaking French, Italian, mm-hmm. Portuguese, and but it was immersion.
Yeah.
It's just what you're talking about. I mean,
immersion works a lot better. It just does. And, you know, growing up, I didn't think it was anything great when my parents spoke to me in Hebrew and in German. They did it just, and I really don't know the reasons why they did it. I think both parents valued knowing other languages because they were multilingual, having come out of Europe. Europeans are much smarter about making their kids multilingual.
Yes, they are.
And, you know, part of that's Europe's not that big. We think of Europe as this big, huge. It's not. If you get it on a properly scaled map, or if you look at it on a globe, you'll see that Europe's really very tiny.
It's like New England. It's
not quite that small.
No. But, yeah.
And so, you know, it's not hard to go from France to Germany to Italy,
sure,
and to you know, it's helpful to know the language and the culture of where you're going, especially if you're going to be doing business with them. And Americans are notoriously not culturally skilled at understanding where other people are coming from. And so this curriculum...
We're ugly Americans.
Yeah. Well, that's where we get that reputation, right?
I know.
Right? The assumption that everybody thinks that, you know, everybody's going to speak English to us because, you know, no, we'd be much better off, and it would help us have better relations with our neighbors to the north, with some French if we want to talk with the folks in Quebec, and Spanish if we want to talk to the folks south of us. And
you know, it's funny when Carol and I went up with the Dodgers to Montreal. She was fascinated with the shop owners who would maybe ask a question or say hello in French, and this, depending on how you answered, they would either continue in French or you know, fly right into English, you know.
Yeah, and it opens so many doors to not be locked into one language. The other thing that I think that knowing multiple languages does is it teaches you to not be as rigid. Right? You get the idea that things are not always exactly as they appear, and that there's subtlety and nuance involved, because you can't translate word for word between any two languages.
That's true.
No two languages. I'm not sure that you can translate between California and New York, but right within one language, but.
Or New York and New York.
Yeah, the different boroughs. Yes, thank you. You know, and only in the Bronx is it called the Bronx, right? Right. You know. Yeah, I teach this one lesson to the Chinese, and I always think of the Bronx because it's you don't put the in front. It's not the Beijing. It's not the New York. You know, and then I think, but I better not mention the Bronx.
Only the Bronx.
Right. Only the Bronx are done that way. Or the flats.
Okay.
The flats out in L.A., right? So there's a few places where the is used, but not very many. It's the United States of America. So there are a few places where the is used. Lessons are always like that. There's always exceptions. And I'm fond of saying to my students, English is funny. English is crazy. It's just one of the rules. Try spelling the words that end in O-U-G-H.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Sure.
They don't all sound like nuff and a rough,
That's
like
right.
through, and, you know, and that's just the beginning of the pronunciation. There's a great routine where Lucy is trying to teach Ricky.
Oh, no.
How to pronounce words that have O-U-G-H in them. And, of course, you know, it doesn't take very long for him to fly off the handle, which, of course, he always does. And off they go. But, yeah. And one of my folks on Facebook here is saying that a person in Luxembourg speaks 6 languages growing up. And that's true because they've got Belgium, they've got France, Germany. But there's also significant... In Luxembourg, you want to talk about a little tiny, tiny country. You know, it's like an hour or two apart. But they've got significantly different dialects within the country. Now, it's a mountainous country. And so until we get to modern cars, transportation is not necessarily as easy. But yeah, I can remember sitting at the Goodyear Tech Center in Luxembourg and talking with somebody and suggesting that, I could work with so-and-so to practice my Luxembourgish, because I was really very interested in the Luxembourgish language.
Wait a minute, back up. Luxembourgish?
Luxembourgish, yeah. They have a language that's all their own.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And actually, and so this friend that I'm talking to, and then I'm saying, well, I can work with, Gerald or whatever it is. And he says, oh, no, you don't want to do that, because he speaks Fiondish. Which is, Fianden is a little town 20 minutes outside of Luxembourg.
I just assume they all spoke German.
Most of them will speak German. They'll do German in the lower grades in high schools and French. A lot of them will speak Swiss and Italian and all the other languages in the area, because everybody comes through. There's just routes that go through Luxembourg.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, what was really cool during the '84 Olympics, Carol was one of the two designated NBC people, and it was really cool. The year before the Olympics in '83, they sent her back to Berlitz to go over all of her languages, including the little dialect of Pakistani that she picked up as a teenager.
Wow.
And so that was very cool, and she used them all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they had fascinating stories.
Yeah.
And
there are times that you need to. I have another fond memory, kind of tickled me when I was working for Goodyear. We went up to Quebec and dealt with Bombardier, who makes the monorail at Disney. And we were actually working with them. They were designing what was then going to be the new generation monorail. And the earlier monorail had used exclusively Goodyear tires.
Okay.
And that's, it was Goodyear tires that were on it in the monorail fire. And this was the next generation. Okay. And the Bombardier, being French, was looking at Michelin, which is a French company, and all of that. And we went in, with a proposal from Goodyear, and I was part of that group. And we had a gentleman named Andre with us. And the Quebecans didn't pick up that Andre is a French name. He was from Luxembourg, but becoming from Luxembourg, he spoke French, German, right, all those languages, and he spoke them relatively well. And we're sitting there in the meeting. And at one point, the Quebec engineers looked at us and said, forgive us, can we speak French in front of you for a few moments? And we said, sure, we understand you need to discuss something. And so they started, and most of us are like, no idea what they're saying, but Andre understands it. And at one point, he loses his cool, and he just blasts them in French. And we knew something was going on because we could hear the emotion and the tone of his voice. And he's in French, and the look on their face, because they totally did not expect any American to either to understand, and certainly not to be able to give it back to them in French. And that was kind of an interesting experiment, or an interesting experience, rather, not experiment.
Yeah, flown on some Bombardier planes too. Yeah,
they make some good vehicles.
Yeah,
and so anyway,
See, I never even thought of like the tires, if you will, on monorails.
Because you don't see them. They're all jacketed.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the challenges in the monorails. They're hard to maintain because they're down inside that cowling. And they get hot.
How do they I was going to say, how do they handle
They get really
heat?
hot. Heat is one of the big issues for those tires. And the tire fire had a lot to do with not knowing if a tire was deflated. Now they're foam filled, but they can still deflate. And so now modern monorails have sensors on what's actually going on in the tires, and temperature gauges and all kinds of stuff, so that they can monitor it, with the idea that because when it goes into maintenance, they peel all that off, and they're able to work on things. But it's got tires that run, that it sits on, and then there are tires on the side that keep it locked in on that.
I saw something on the Fox News feed that Michelin has developed an airless tire. I don't know how that's gonna. I mean, I'm sure
it's a foam kind of thing. I don't know. I've not looked at the.
Yeah, but it's fascinating.
Well, that's what you go to
I know
patents
they
for.
use gases and some.
Gold gas is still not a lot of difference between air and gas.
Yeah.
Right. Air is just a mixture of gases.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. So.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of tires, like tires for the presidential vehicles are run flat safe.
Naturally, yeah.
You can pelt them with a bunch of bullets.
Bulletproof, yeah.
You can riddle them with bullets, and they'll just say, okay, well, that was interesting. You're not going to shoot the tires out from under them. It's just that those kind of tires are expensive, heavy, and but that's what armor plating's all about.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to protect some folks. But the average person running down I-95 doesn't quite need that quality of tire. So, and they wouldn't want to pay for it.
Yeah, that was. Yeah. Did not have a price tag on that, by the way.
Oh, I'm sure it had a price tag. I'm sure we paid for it.
Yeah.
I'm sure we bought those tires. Whoever gets the contract, whichever time, and I think those things rotate. But I've been out of the tire biz for a lot of years.
Yeah.
Since just before 9/11. So, yeah. It's sobering to realize that the kids at college now.
Oh, I know.
Have, don't know what a pre-9/11 world was. Right? They've only lived in a post-9/11 world.
There's a thing on Facebook last night that they did a poll. It was one of those man on the street things in New York City talking to kids. And they did not know what Normandy was.
Yeah. I can believe that.
They didn't know what Second World War was.
Yeah, so it makes you wonder, right, how fast did people forget coming through the sea? And no wonder it got coming back to where we started this session, right, with the song from the Song of the Sea. Maybe that's part of why it was so important to create a song connected to crossing the sea. Because it is easy as soon as you're in the next generation. Then it's history. And it's story. And it's no longer as important if it really happened or not. Even though the events are somehow carried on inside us. We now know that, for example, children of Holocaust survivors carry markers from their parents having been through that experience. And I can say that as a second generation. So it's part of why I'm weird.
Dear friend of ours, chief photographer at ESPN, Jeff Israel's parents were both Holocaust survivors, and he heads a group in Connecticut that is, an awareness group. And you just think about that, and it just how anybody could be a denier is mind-boggling.
Well, again, didn't live through it, right? And we are forced by circumstance to live on the stories of our parents. Yeah.
But you've got enough video, you've got enough books. I mean,
yeah, the Germans kept amazing records.
You can't deny it.
Not reasonably. Unfortunately, though, there are other genocides out there that people are ignoring. Right?
Well, yeah. There's
right?
several in Africa that are still going on.
Yeah, Darfur.
Yeah.
Right? And Europe and Asia do it too. Everybody does it. There's been a number of really horrendous genocides. So, that's not in any way to lessen the horror and the unspeakable evil that my parents and the rest of my family went through. because you can't describe that. But yeah, there have been other really devastating things, and the world turns a blind eye for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
We really don't pay attention. Like a lot of, one of my pet questions in one of my in the religion classes, we talk about Al Qaeda and why are they Muslim? Well, they're Muslim because they started in a mostly Muslim country, right? They're not Muslim because there's anything about Islam that makes that likely. It has much more to do with the socioeconomic conditions in that part of the world than it does with anything else. And if somebody's going to start doing those kinds of behaviors, you got a 99.9% chance it's going to be a Muslim, because that's the dominant religion. Just as if it were going to start in the U.S., the odds are it would be, basically some kind of Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly have enough homegrown stuff that we know that's true. We don't have quite the same dynamic as the vacuum in that part of the Middle East that was created after Desert Storm and all of those wonderful other related events.
What you hear, of course, I deal with a lot of, the basketball players from various countries, and some of these Sudanese players, just tell horrific stories of,
Darfur.
It could be
Sudan.
their whole family.
Yeah.
Was wiped out.
Yeah.
It's just incomprehensible.
Darfur is definitely one of the black spots on human history. And look at what's ongoing in parts of the Middle East and other parts of Africa. There's more than enough genocide going on. So I can see where people don't learn about it and then think that they know everything.
But the question is why? What do the people who caused this, if you will, what do they get out of it?
The people who caused the Holocaust?
Yeah. What do they? What?
What was Hitler after?
Yeah.
I think Hitler was after getting farmland without people as a way to feed a population. I think that was mostly about food and resources. Something that Europe is always actually fairly scarce on.
Wow. Okay. I never even.
Yeah. Well, there was
heard of that before.
Right. Well, there was a concept. We don't do a lot of teaching about that, right? What are the things that led into the idea for the Nazis? One of them was eugenics, which was a big, right? There was a big school of eugenics, which was we were going to build. Right? We have American psychologists, behaviorists, who believed that we could grow a master race.
Yeah.
Right. We sterilized people that we thought were not worthy of having children. Now, not that we put them in camps and killed them, but we sterilized people that we thought, you shouldn't have kids. Your genes shouldn't go into the pool. That's only a few steps short.
Sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a slippery slope. And
well, worse than that.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of doesn't go with today's understanding of ethics and human dignity. And so the whole world is not necessarily with the APA on their standards of ethics. And, there are still people who think waterboarding is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Right? And again, we have history that says when you do something like that, you don't get reliable information. You might get some usable information, but the bulk of what you're going to get, they're going to say whatever is going to make their lives easier, as horrendous as you're making their lives. And so you can't, there've been far too much false information that's come out, or false confessions under torture, just to get it over with and done.
Sure. Oh, you hear that.
Right. There are lots of people who just want a simple death. They don't want a tortured death. They just, and they'll say whatever to make it happen. That is not all that far from where we started at the beginning of this hour, which is, reminding people that punishment is not always the best route, nor, interestingly, are overly large rewards. It's one of the reasons why we see this unhinging of ethics in corporate America is that some of the rewards and incentives have just gone off the scale, and it's no longer tied to the work, and so it becomes the end that justifies the mean, which means people lie, cheat, and steal. It's so now we're really touching on one of my personal philosophies, which is that I believe that the system should be designed to make it easier to do what's right and ethical than to cheat, lie, and steal. But that takes some consciousness.
That's harder.
It's much harder. It puts a lot more of the pressure on the folks in leadership positions. It takes a lot more for the folks that are responsible, the adult supervision in the crowd. They need to adult. And it's much easier just to say, well,
there's so few of those.
Yeah, unfortunately there are. But we need that sea change. Right? That's I think a necessary human evolution, is to move into the place where we do have some adult supervision, and people aren't just about controlling others or just about being a victim or any of the the games people play. Right? Thank you, Eric Byrne. The games people play. Great book if you haven't read it. He looked at how to describe different power shifts in a relationship and in a discussion. And when we adult each other, it works much better. When we respect each other, when we seek God, also where we started, right? When we seek God, that means we're looking for that God spark in each other. Right? We're not looking to lower other people because we're looking for what's divine, what's holy. And if I'm looking for what's divine and what's holy, then I'm going to look for that in you.
Okay.
Right? So I'm going to naturally look for what's good in you. That doesn't mean I'm going to be blind or ignorant to people who lie, cheat, and steal. But I'm going to be working to design a system so that it's not easy for them. Right now, unfortunately, we've got a system where it's really easier to lie, cheat, and steal than to do what's right. And people who want to do what's right often have to buck the system to do it. That, to me, that's a consciousness issue on a human level. So yeah, I'm going pretty heavy and pretty deep here.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I just took this plunge down the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, you did without a parachute. Wow.
Well, hopefully not without a parachute.
Yeah.
But to me, that's what seeking God is all about. It's about how do I look for the wonder in life? How do I keep myself balanced? Not in the clouds and not just running around hugging trees, although there's a value every once in a while in getting close to nature. Not living on the fringes or on any extremes. How do I keep myself on this middle road? You want to talk about Buddhists, right? How do I keep myself on this middle road that understands the incredible beauty of a rainbow, of a mountain, of cloud shapes, of a flower? Why did my cactus put out 8 incredible blooms on one night? 2 nights ago, 3 nights ago, whatever. I have to look at my phone and see what night it was, because I walked by and it was like, wow, look at him. It's got all these blooms, and sure enough, that night, big open blooms and the scent out in my front yard was gorgeous. That's what I used to love about
walking through Sabino Canyon when the cactuses were blossoming.
Oh, yeah.
Like, wow.
Did you ever go to Tohono Chul's Bloom Night?
No.
We went to it twice. And if you're ever close to Tucson in July, end of June, beginning of July, they're getting close to it now. It's called Bloom Night, and they know to watch all of their night blooming cereus. They've got the queen, right? They've got hundreds of queen plants throughout the garden, throughout the park.
Wow.
And they have people who are very skilled and knowledgeable at seeing when those blooms are going to open, because they start out and they'll stop, and then all of the plants will get together and they'll all bloom for the most part. I mean, there's a handful of plants that'll open a couple of blooms here and there, but for the most part, they all open on this one night. And the park is open that night. Most times it closes at sunset, but that night it's open, and the restaurants are open and the gift shops are open and the whole park is functioning. Wow. And there's hundreds of people walking around taking pictures of these night blooming cereus.
Oh, yeah.
And they're gorgeous. They're spectacular. In fact, well, if you look at my phone, here, let me see if I can get to my phone. You'll see that I've actually got a picture of one of them on my.
Beautiful.
That's my wallpaper, if you will. It's one of the flowers, and they are spectacular. I also discovered that you can walk into a cholla trying to take a picture of one of those.
Yes. Been there, done that.
Yeah, cholla is a whole new animal. Not one I suggest people get cozy to.
No, definitely not.
The pain of those...
Can't wrap your arms around that one.
No, it wraps its arms around you, or in you. Half the pain is getting it back out.
Yes, that's true.
Because the spines are hooked, and it's an impressive pain. I remember that. I did that. I was reaching down to take a picture of one of the blooms, and a cholla grabbed me. That's why they're called jumping, but I know that I'm the one who brushed against it. I'm smart enough to know it didn't jump. Oh, the legends we have. Oh, the tree jumped out in the middle of my driveway. The cholla jumped out and bit me. And I know that there's one called a jumping cholla. But, so anyway, Tohono Chul Bloom Night coming up, a free ad for them. And so let me flip back over to a couple of things happening at the temple, because I would be derelict to not mention it. We've got Shavuot on Saturday night. We're doing a dairy dinner, and that's at 7, and then the service following. And that should be fun, a night of learning and a night of study connected to Shavuot, the giving of the tablets. And then the week after that, next week, we're celebrating Brian Alexander being called to Torah. It's a bar mitzvah celebration for us. We're all excited about that. He's a great young man, has really, really done what most of the B'nai Mitzvah have done, which is to blossom and become this elegant young man in our midst. So we're looking at celebrating with him. Those are just some of the things that are happening. Please check out our website, www.eitzchayim.org, eitzchayim.org. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Congregation Eitz Chayim. Thank you for being part of Ask a Rabbi.
Have a great week. You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, WPSL.com, webcaster to the world on Alexa and Google Home.